Hey guys, tonight we're gliding into a misty Norse morning that feels like someone left the freezer door open on purpose. A thin rind of frost clings to every plank, and the harbor smells of brine, tar, and an overworked herd of reindeer parked somewhere just out of sight. You probably won't survive this if you're hoping for thrilling raids or cinematic battles. This is the boring side of Viking life, where merchants debate grain prices and forget their animals. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, pop your location and local time into the comments so I can see where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your boots crunch against salt-crusted boards as you step onto the dock. The light is gray, but somehow soft, the kind that makes everything look like it's been dipped in ash. Vikings in wool tunics shuffle about, heads still foggy from last night's mead. A trader named Eric is scratching his beard, trying to remember where he tied up his reindeer. You hear him mutter, "I swear they were near the fish barrels." It's a scene more comedy than conquest, and it sets the tone for this harbor. A knot of sleepy commerce at the edge of the known world. The wooden ships rock lazily. One is piled with sacks of dried cod, another with coils of rope, another with bundles of fur so dense they look like unmoving animals. There's a mainstream historical fact tucked into this dockside tableau. Archaeologists have found evidence of active Viking trade posts stretching from Hedeby to Birka, not all of them glamorous or famous. And yes, historians still argue whether certain northern outposts were true markets or more like occasional meetups. You take a deep breath and smell smoked fish, damp pine, and the faint musk of reindeer. Except you can't see any reindeer. An old woman named Asfrid sits on a crate, slowly carving runes into a driftwood stick. She claims the carvings will help the traders remember their cargo, but the runes are crooked and look more like doodles than records, a fringe tidbit that makes you smile. You glance over her shoulder and see she's drawn a little reindeer with an arrow pointing to nowhere. You could swear she's trolling them. Beyond the docks lies the settlement's single muddy lane. It snakes between turf-roofed houses, their smoke curling up into a pale sky. A dog with one ear flopped sideways pads past, nose to the ground, as though it might do a better job of finding the missing herd than its owners. You follow Eric to a corral built of rough pine posts. Empty. He sighs. Again? His voice is equal parts exasperation and resignation. He tells you this happens every spring. Someone forgets to latch the gate and the animals wander toward the hills. This is Viking commerce at its most relatable, people losing track of their assets. You pass a row of storage sheds. Inside one, 3 men bicker over tally sticks. One says there were 5 sacks, another says 7. You realize the problem. One is counting in an old system of cuts, the other in new. You remember reading that the Vikings used both weights and marks, and that standardization wasn't always their strong suit. A goose waddles through their legs unnoticed. You almost trip over it, then stifle a laugh. By the edge of the fjord, a small altar holds offerings to Njord, god of sea and trade. A few coins, a carved toy boat, and a chunk of seal fat sit in a shallow bowl. Someone's placed a single reindeer antler there, perhaps as an appeal for the herd's safe return. The wind sighs across the water, making the offering flames gutter and flicker. It's so still otherwise that you can hear the crack of ice shifting far up the mountains. You climb a short rise to look back at the whole harbor. The ships, the houses, the scattered people, all tiny shapes under a pale northern sun. The fjord gleams like a polished blade. In the distance, dark hills roll upward into snowy ridges. This isn't the postcard Viking world of horns and helmets. This is the administrative morning after. And you're standing in the middle of it, part witness, part participant, shivering in your cloak but strangely soothed by the quiet repetition. A bell clangs, a hollow wooden bell, not metal, signaling the start of the trading day. People move a little faster, but not much. Eric pulls a small tablet of wax from his belt pouch and scratches a note. Check corrals again. He glances at you and says, "They'll turn up." They always do. His calm is contagious. You feel your shoulders drop and your breathing slow. For a moment you imagine those reindeer strolling somewhere just out of sight, bells tinkling, waiting for someone to remember them. As you drift back toward the docks, the morning light ripples off the water. A small boy tosses pebbles, each skipping once before. You follow the uneven planks from the dock toward the row of warehouses, each built with thick pine beams and roofed-in turf that sprouts with hardy weeds. Inside, the air shifts from salt-sharp to dusty sweet, filled with the smell of dried fish, walrus ivory shavings, and the faint tang of tallow candles gone stale. Somewhere a door bangs, echoing like a muted drum. This is the inventory heart of the settlement, and you're walking through it as if in a slow-motion dream, every footstep soft on the packed earth floor. The first warehouse is stacked with dried cod hanging from wooden racks. Their stiff tails point downward like frozen pennants. A trader named Torvi carefully counts each bundle, tapping a tally stick. But she keeps losing her place because two crows have found their way in and are hopping along the rafters, squawking in disagreement. You smirk at the sight. Viking trade at its most glamorous. Mainstream history notes that stockfish, or dried cod, was one of the key exports from northern Norway and Iceland, and here it looks more like somebody's endless laundry line than precious cargo. Historians still argue whether this fish trade actually bankrolled distant explorations or merely supplemented local markets. Beyond the cod is a low-lit corner stacked with walrus ivory tusks, some polished, some still dusty with Arctic grit. A fringe tidbit. You see a tiny carving of a reindeer scratched onto one tusk, like a doodle left by a bored scribe. A burly man with red braids explains. Helps me remember which tusks already paid for the animals. You're not sure if he's joking. You move deeper and find bundles of furs, fox, beaver, and something labeled simply mystery. They smell faintly of smoke, salt, and wet dog. One bale is marked with a rune you can't identify. A young assistant shrugs. Could be timber, could be turnips. He laughs nervously. You remember Asfried's crooked runes from the dock and wonder how much of this trade runs on good faith versus scribbles. Another warehouse glows with low firelight. Here, sacks of rye and barley are stacked like squat pillars. You brush your hand over one, and it leaves a chalky residue. A clerk with ink-stained fingers flips a wax tablet back and forth, squinting at a list. 6 sacks or 16, he mutters. The open scholarly debate over Viking standard measures seems alive in front of you. Weights, marks, and tallies overlapping without a clear system. It's strangely comforting, like finding out your own messy grocery list is historically accurate. Outside, in a smaller shed, you find rope coils, iron nails, and a barrel of something that looks like tar, but smells faintly of pine and honey. The merchant explains it's ship glue, a mix of resin and beeswax, a forgotten recipe from the West. He gives you a wink and says it also works on cracked hands in winter. You file that away as the second quirky tidbit of the morning. Through a wide door, you glimpse the reindeer corral again. Empty. A single bell dangles from the gate, rocking gently in the wind as though mocking the merchants who forgot to tie it. You imagine the herd wandering among birch trees somewhere, shaking off snow, nibbling lichen, blissfully unaware of their commercial value. The settlement hums around you. Boots scuff, voices murmur, gulls cry overhead. But the missing animals create an undertone of mystery. You pause at a table where several traders have laid out small objects. Amber beads, carved combs, and soapstone bowls. These are samples for barter, each representing a cargo waiting to be loaded. One woman in a green cloak leans over and whispers, "Sometimes we just put the wrong cargo on the wrong ship." It'll show up in Denmark months later. She chuckles, eyes crinkling at the edges. In your head, you think of modern shipping containers ending up on the wrong continent. Nothing changes. A cold breeze creeps through the gap in the boards, carrying with it the smell of the fjord and distant pine smoke. You pull your cloak tighter. The bustle of counting, sorting, and arguing continues. But it's more like background music now. Soft, repetitive, hypnotic. You notice how each merchant's gestures slow down, how they glance at their notes and then at the door, as though the reindeer might walk back in at any moment. You end up at the far side of the last warehouse, where a door opens directly to the water. Small boats bob against wooden posts. A boy drops a crate into one, and the splash startles a flock of ducks into flight. The sound echoes against the hills. You lean against the door frame and breathe in the brackish scent. Realizing how much of this world is built on patient waiting, waiting for ships, waiting for animals, waiting for spring thaw. As your eyes adjust to the dimness, you notice how even the most ordinary objects, barrels, sacks, ropes, take on a kind of slow, mythic aura in the hush of morning. You feel your own heartbeat settling into their rhythm. The saga you're in isn't about warriors, but about bookkeeping, logistics, and memory. And yet, in its own sleepy way, It's every bit as vast as a longship slicing across the sea. You close your eyes for a moment and hear the overlapping sounds, the creak of timber, the flap of sails, the murmur of traders counting under their breath. It's like a lullaby disguised as commerce, carrying you one step further into this forgotten corner of Viking life, where losing track of your herd is just part of the day. You step from the dark warehouses into a faint midday light that looks like watered-down silver. A cluster of traders waits by the pier, arguing over a rolled-up map smudged with old mead stains. The wind off the fjord rattles the edge of the parchment like a loose drum skin. You join them, peering over shoulders at inked coastlines that look more like doodles than geography. Nobody seems entirely sure where they're headed next, and that uncertainty drifts through the group like sea mist. A boat rocks at the dock, its hull tarred black, its sail furled tight. 2 reindeer antlers are tied to the prow as a good luck charm, though the actual animals remain missing. A man named Kettle grumbles, "Greenland? Vinland? Maybe just another inlet with too many rocks, mainstream history fact." Although Norse sailors reached Greenland and briefly Vinland, the routes were long, cold, and imprecise. Historians still argue whether some voyages were deliberate colonizing efforts or just extended trade trips gone off course. Standing here, you see why. The map looks like a child's drawing of spaghetti. You clamber aboard, feeling the planks flex under your boots. The air smells of pine tar, damp wool, and a hint of smoked fish still clinging to a crate. Someone hands you a small wooden cup of thin ale. It's lukewarm but oddly soothing. Across from you, a young navigator squints at the horizon, then at a lump of magnetite dangling from a string, a crude compass, maybe, or just a charm against sea monsters. He shrugs. "Northish," he mutters. The sail creaks as they hoist it. A gull cries overhead, circling like a bored spectator. The fjord's water glints, steel blue under a pale sky. You watch the settlement slide backward, turf roofs shrinking, smoke threads vanishing. Out here, the wind carries a low hum across the water, a sound that makes your eyelids heavier. The crew rows with steady strokes, their oars dipping like clock hands into the sea. At mid-fjord, you pass a buoy shaped like a carved dragon head. It's meant to scare off spirits, or at least mark a channel. A fringe tidbit. A sagging rope attached to it holds a bundle of dried herbs, supposedly to keep the boat's memory sharp, like an herbal notepad. You picture modern travelers setting GPS waypoints and smile at the continuity of human forgetfulness. As the boat slides onward, you sense how vulnerable this kind of navigation is. Clouds smear across the sky, obscuring the sun. The wind shifts, and the crew murmurs about unseen currents. One mentions a reef that wasn't there last year. Another insists they've gone too far west. The boat keeps moving, a floating debate club over dark water. You lean over the gunwale and see the fjord's depth fade from green to inky black. Kelp drifts like hair below the surface. A seal pops its head up, eyes glossy, then dives. The water smells colder here, saltier, sharper. You tuck your hands into your cloak, feeling the fabric's rough weave, and watch the horizon for a landmark you don't know how to name. Catel pulls out a chunk of driftwood etched with notches. "This many days from home," he explains, tapping the wood. He looks at you and shrugs. "Unless we miscounted again." Everyone chuckles weakly. You realize these sailors exist in a world where memory and superstition fill the gaps of cartography. It's strangely relaxing, like surrendering your phone's GPS and trusting the road signs. A pale mountain rises ahead, its slopes dotted with birch trees. Someone thinks it's the landmark before Greenland. Someone else calls it the one that looks like a sleeping giant's knee. The wind shifts again, and the boat tilts, sail snapping. You sway with it, feeling the gentle lift and drop, the heartbeat of water against wood. The motion rocks you toward drowsiness, a cradle disguised as a ship. In the distance, 2 other boats appear, small triangles of sail against the horizon. The crew murmurs, are they allies, rivals, or just more confused traders? You catch fragments of jokes about reindeer swimming across the fjord, leading everyone to Vinland accidentally. You smile and imagine the herd doing exactly that, bells tinkling underwater. The light softens to a dim gray blue. The coastline on both sides stretches like claws into the sea, but no one can name the bays correctly. You glance back at the map. It's smeared even worse now. The ink looks like migrating birds in flight. The navigator sighs and says, "We'll know when we smell the moss." And somehow that feels like enough. As you sit there, your eyelids droop. The boat glides. The rowers breathe in rhythm. The cold air on your face mingles with the warm cloak around your shoulders. Each creak of the ship becomes a metronome for your thoughts, guiding you gently onward into the next stretch of this meandering Viking saga where the sea is as much a lullaby as a road. The boat noses up to a low timbered hall whose roof sags under a thin crust of snow. From outside, it looks almost like a sleeping animal, its ridgepole bristling with carved dragon heads meant to impress or intimidate. Inside, though, it's warm and dim, smelling of wood smoke, mead, and damp wool cloaks. You duck beneath the lintel and find yourself in the hush of an oath hall, a place where trade deals and promises are sealed not with drama, but with dull bronze rings and muttered runes. Long benches run the length of the room, covered in sheepskins. Candles sputter in iron holders, dripping wax down like stalactites. At the far end, a table of elders sits in a half circle, their faces a mixture of boredom and mild curiosity. They're here to witness agreements about soapstone, walrus ivory, and missing reindeer. Not exactly saga material. A mainstream historical fact. Assemblies, or things, were the backbone of Viking social and commercial life, often more about arbitration and regulation than raiding. Historians still argue whether certain halls doubled as religious spaces or were purely civic. Standing here, you can feel both possibilities at once, prayers whispered alongside price lists. You're ushered to a side bench. The trader Ketil sets down a pouch of beads as a gesture of good faith. Across from him, a man in a blue cloak lays out a small curved knife. They talk in low voices, occasionally glancing at a bronze ring mounted on a post. Each new promise requires touching that ring, as if to upload the agreement into a sacred server. The ritual is slow, repetitive, strangely calming. You feel yourself drifting as they recite clauses about delivery dates and penalties for mislaid herds. At one point, an elder nods off, chin hitting his chest. Another coughs to cover it, but the whole hall smiles. A fringe tidbit. One elder has tucked a carved walrus tusk under his arm like a comfort object, the way a modern traveler clutches a neck pillow. You notice the tusk has runes etched along its length. Maybe a prayer, maybe a shopping list. The ambiguity is almost funny. Outside, the wind rattles the wooden shutters, a soft percussion to the low voices inside. A boy enters with a tray of steaming mugs. You take one. It's a thin broth of herbs and barley. The taste is earthy, slightly bitter, but warming. As you sip, the hall's sensory details deepen. The crackle of fire, the scent of pine resin dripping from beams, the soft shuffle of boots on packed dirt. Every sound seems designed to slow your breathing. A carved panel on the wall catches your eye. It shows a line of animals walking single file into a forest. You think at first it's deer, then realize it's reindeer. The carver left their tails half finished, as if he'd wandered off mid-task. You smile at the echo of your own story. Even the art forgot the herd. Someone at the table invokes Njord again, touching a small bowl of salt water. The elders nod. Another man produces a scrap of cloth embroidered with a crude map. Fjords, rivers, a dot for the hall itself. He points to it, muttering about which routes remain safe this winter. You see him trace and retrace the same lines, like a child drawing over an already colored page. A hush falls as Cattell stands to recite an oath. His words are slow, deliberate, almost sing-song. You catch fragments about ivory tusks, soapstone bowls, and return of the animals unharmed. He touches the bronze ring, then his forehead, then the table. Everyone murmurs assent. The ritual feels both mundane and mystical, an ASMR incantation from another millennium. The candles flicker lower. Shadows stretch up the walls. In the dimness, the carved dragon heads overhead look like they're nodding off. You rest your elbows on the bench and let your head tilt. The warmth, the murmured voices, the steady rhythm of the oath-taking blend into a kind of lullaby. Even the wooden beams seem to creak in time with your breathing. Somewhere behind you, a door opens and a draft sweeps through, carrying a whiff of snow and pine. The elders shiver, but keep reciting. A dog thumps its tail once and settles back into sleep. You watch the bronze ring glint faintly in the firelight, and imagine all the forgotten promises it's absorbed over the years. Livestock misplaced, shipments delayed, maps misread. In a way, it's the perfect symbol for this saga. A circle of intention, bound by memory as much as by metal. As the last oath concludes, A bell outside chimes once, marking the hour. People stir, stretch, and begin collecting their things. Some head for the door, others linger to gossip. You remain seated, feeling the residual hush of the hall pressing gently against your ears, like the soft interior of a seashell. With every breath you take, the mundane rhythms of Viking commerce deepen into a quiet trance, preparing you for whatever slow, odd adventure comes next. You leave the Oath Hall behind and follow a narrow, frozen track inland, the sound of the fjord fading until it's just a memory in your ears. Ahead, a small caravan creeps forward like a line of ants burdened with supplies. The men and women guiding the pack horses, and occasionally a few bewildered goats, speak in low tones, the way people do when trying not to wake a sleeping giant. You fall in beside them, your boots crunching through a thin crust of ice on the path. The day feels stretched. Gray sky above, white patches of snow below, and a muted hush hanging over everything. The caravan carries soapstone blocks quarried from the hills, bundles of antler combs carved for trade, and sacks of dried berries. You reach out to touch a soapstone slab. It's cool, chalky, and faintly oily. Mainstream history notes that Vikings prized soapstone for cookware and building, and they lugged it overland just like this. Historians still argue whether certain inland routes were mainly for quarrying or for connecting scattered settlements. You sense how long these debates have been going on. Centuries of scholars tracing footpaths you're now walking. A fringe tidbit presents itself at the next wagon, a wooden cage filled with ravens wearing tiny strips of colored cloth on their legs. A boy explains they're messengers meant to help find the reindeer herd, or at least warn of approaching storms. You're skeptical but charmed. One raven cocks its head at you, as if to say it knows exactly where the animals are, but won't tell. The path twists through low birch stands, their white bark like ghost fingers against the sky. The caravan slows, not sure which of three trails leads back to the coast. Someone mutters, "Left, right, or the middle?" That's not a middle. Another pulls out a wax tablet smeared with sketches. No help there. You picture Google Maps, buffering and smile. The terrain rises gently, giving you a view back toward the fjord. A silver ribbon winding between dark hills. Ships, now just specks. You can smell resin from distant pines and the faint metallic tang of iron from someone's tool belt. The soundscape has changed too. No gulls, only the occasional raven call and the squeak of snow under hooves. The motion of the caravan becomes hypnotic, each step in time with your heartbeat, like a moving lullaby across the tundra. At a resting spot near a frozen stream, the group unloads some cargo. A woman named Brynhild shows you a carved antler comb with delicate runes along the spine. "Keeps lice away," she says, then winks. Or at least we like to think so. Another fringe detail to pocket. You run your fingers over the smooth antler, feeling its ridges and warmth from her hand. You sit on a rock, watching steam curl from the horse's nostrils, someone brews a thin tea of pine needles and dried berries over a small fire. The smell is sharp but pleasant, like breathing the forest itself. You sip from a horn cup and feel the heat spread through your chest. In the background, a pair of traders debate whether a shortcut even exists anymore. It used to, one insists. Unless the river moved, says the other. Historians still argue whether these inland routes were permanent or seasonal. This is how such arguments begin. After the break, the caravan starts again, veering onto the middle path by collective shrug. You follow, feeling the ground rise under your feet, the landscape growing more open. The birch thins out, replaced by low shrubs and patches of exposed stone. You notice faint hoof prints in the snow, too large for goats, too small for elk. Could be reindeer. Someone points, hopeful, but the prints veer off toward a ridge. As you climb, the sky darkens to pewter. Snowflakes drift like ashes, landing on your cloak and melting instantly. The caravan grows quieter, each person absorbed in their own thoughts or just saving breath. You think about how memory guides people here. No signposts, no milestones, except rocks and stories. It's as if the land itself prefers to stay half forgotten. At the top of a low pass, you pause and look ahead. The valley spreads out like a gray bowl, dotted with more stones than trees. Far in the distance, a dark line moves. Maybe wind stirring shrubs, maybe a herd. No one can say. You feel a flicker of anticipation, but mostly a gentle calm, as though the quest itself is the point, not the arrival. The caravan lumbers on. Soapstone blocks swaying, antler combs clinking in sacks. You wrap your cloak tighter and step forward, boots sliding a little on the icy path. Each step makes a small crunch, each breath a soft cloud. Around you, the dull colors and soft sounds blend into a slow-motion tableau of medieval commerce at its least glamorous and most human. People trying to remember where they left their stuff. It's oddly comforting. You let your eyelids droop a little, walking half awake through the muted landscape, ready to see where this meandering Viking saga carries you next. You push away from the memory of gulls and fjord water, drifting toward the inland valleys where the really unglamorous parts of Viking trade happen. Here, the air feels thicker, moss-scented, and warmer from the shelter of hills. By now, you've trudged several kilometers on narrow animal tracks, your boots damp with dew, and you start to wonder why anyone ever agreed to drive a herd of semi-wild reindeer through such terrain, just to exchange furs and salt. Somewhere behind you, a bell clinks. A single reindeer straggler shaking off flies like a moody co-worker late to a meeting. You pass low birch stands, their white bark mottled like old parchment, and feel a wave of slow calm. Historians still argue whether Viking traders truly maintained their own domesticated reindeer, or simply bartered with Sami herders for seasonal access. Either way, The mental image of a horn-helmeted merchant forgetting where he parked his living cart is hard to shake. A mainstream fact slips in here. The Viking Age trade networks stretched from Newfoundland to Baghdad, but most of the action away from the coast involved pack animals, sledges, and very muddy boots. A quirky tidbit floats up. Some accounts hint that traders used carved whale vertebrae as portable stools while waiting for herds to regroup, basically early medieval camping chairs. The path rises and drops. Pine needles muffle your footsteps, and you imagine the hum of insects as a low-budget lullaby. You see small cairns, stacks of stones used to mark the way, though several have toppled, maybe from frost heave or bored teenagers 1,000 years ago. Each fallen marker gives the sensation of déjà vu. You've walked past this same stump 3 times, haven't you? That's when the slow panic of losing the herd mixes with the acceptance of Viking logistics. This isn't a heroic saga. It's an unpaid internship with antlers. Your pack weighs heavily. Inside, you keep trade tokens. Rings of copper alloy, glass beads, a bit of amber shaped like a teardrop. Each time you shift your shoulders, you hear a faint chime from the beads, like a quiet reminder of why you're here. Still, you pause under a spruce to catch your breath and mentally compose the world's most boring saga verse. Lo, he forgot his reindeer again. Lo, he shall be late for the market. A small joke, but you chuckle at your own delivery, second only to your earlier quip about the bored gulls. By now, twilight filters through the canopy, even though it's midday. Northern summers can do that, turning sky light into a weird sideways glow. The reindeer bells have stopped entirely. You lean on a staff carved with runes you don't fully understand, but you like to pretend they say, "This way to the tavern." Somewhere off to your left, water trickles over stones, and you know a shallow stream bars your path. Crossing it means wet boots again, but staying put risks losing the herd forever. You step into the water anyway, noticing how cold it bites the arches of your feet. The stream smells faintly of iron, like a forgotten nail in a toolbox. Another mainstream fact surfaces. Viking traders valued bog iron from inland marshes, smelting it in small furnaces for nails, rivets, and tools. Mundane, yes, but essential for ship repair. A fringed tidbit attaches itself. A few obscure finds of tiny iron runes shaped like reindeer antlers. No one's sure if they were charms, trade tags, or just bored blacksmith doodles. On the far bank, you collapse onto a mossy log, catching your breath. You're still, except for the wind threading the trees like fingers through harp strings. You realize how easily people could vanish in this landscape. One step off the trail, a little fog, and you're a saga footnote. Yet there's also relief in that anonymity. No expectations, no heroic battles, just the quiet comedy of someone trying to remember which direction the herd went. You settle into the soundscape. Distant crows, the shush of spruce needles, your own heartbeat slowing. In this suspended moment, the boredom becomes its own kind of meditation. If you nod off now, no one will notice, not even the reindeer. You wake from a half-doze on that mossy log, the hush of the inland valley pressing against your ears like cotton. Somewhere ahead, the world opens into a tiny market settlement. A few turf roof houses, a low wooden palisade, and the unmistakable smell of smoked fish mingling with pine pitch. You trudge toward it, boots squelching, thinking of warm broth and a place to sit that isn't damp. The settlement looks less like a bustling Viking town and more like an overgrown campsite for traveling salespeople who lost their reindeer. The first merchant you see is stacking bundles of walrus ivory with the care of someone rearranging oversized chopsticks. Mainstream fact slides in. Walrus ivory from the Arctic was a prized commodity in early medieval Europe, carved into chess pieces, knife handles, and church decorations. A quirky tidbit flickers. Some traders reportedly used dried fish skins as makeshift bubble wrap to protect the tusks during transport. Probably smelled fantastic after a week on the trail. Historians still argue whether these inland posts were full-time communities or just seasonal pop-ups timed with trade routes and grazing patterns. Either way, the result feels oddly modern, like a cross between a weekend farmer's market and a warehouse club. You wander past a stall selling iron tools and bright glass beads, their colors almost neon against the brown backdrop. Someone hammers a strip of copper while humming a tune that sounds suspiciously like a medieval remix of elevator music. You pause at a table displaying carved antler combs, functional, but also status symbols for travelers who wanted to look presentable after weeks of mud. One craftsman waves you over, offering a special comb guaranteed to repel lice, curses, and in-laws. You decline, but chuckle at the pitch. Down at the creek's edge, a small group of women dye wool with lichens, turning cloth a muted gold. The smell is sharp and earthy, a northern cousin to olive drab. You remember the herd of reindeer, your supposed transport, and picture them wandering somewhere behind you, like runaway luggage. A second joke bubbles up. You should have tied an air tag to each antler. Instead, you kick at the mud and tell yourself they're probably grazing calmly, planning to meet you at closing time. A local elder sits on a stool carved from driftwood, telling a slow story about a ghost herd that once disappeared into the hills and returned only at midwinter, fatter than before. You can't tell if this is legend, weather lore, or a clever excuse for losing stock. Either way, it fits the mood. Trade here moves at the pace of clouds. Even the dogs look sleepy, sprawled beside piles of wool sacks, barely raising an eyebrow as you pass. You're offered a mug of thin ale. The cup smells faintly of juniper, and you sip it carefully. Warm, slightly sour, but comforting. A fringe detail slips in. Archaeologists have found traces of imported hops and herbs in Viking brewing pits, suggesting experimentation with flavors far beyond the stereotypical mead. You picture a proto-craft beer scene here, complete with horn mugs and ironic rune tattoos. As you sip, you overhear merchants arguing about the price of salt. One insists on counting it by the scoop, another by the weight of a reindeer hide. The argument loops like an early sitcom, and you imagine a laugh track behind their voices. It's not heroic, but it's real. Economics, misunderstandings, and the occasional missing herd. The sky deepens into a diluted blue. Smoke from the turf houses drifts horizontally, carrying the smell of mutton stew and tar. You realize the rhythm of this place. No one rushes, not even to reclaim wandering animals. They know the land, the herds, and the slow migrations. Your panic about the reindeer starts to melt, replaced by a drowsy acceptance. If you're meant to find them, you will. If not, someone will turn the story into a saga anyway, and you'll be immortalized as that one trader who forgot his herd. The merchants begin laying down their wares, and you find a quiet corner by a stack of timber. The faint hum of distant bells, real or imagined, tickles your ear. Perhaps the reindeer are closer than you think, or perhaps that's just wind through the lichen. Either way, you feel the edges of sleep gathering around your eyes like early frost on window panes. The market fades into a background hum of voices, dogs, and river sounds, perfect for lulling you toward another soft doze. You drift out of the market settlement at dawn, a ribbon of fog curling off the river like steam from an oversized kettle. Your boots make that sticky mud sound with each step, and somewhere in the hills ahead, a reindeer bell tinkles. Unless it's just the wind snagging on your imagination. The air tastes of spruce resin and faint smoke. You shoulder your pack, feeling the beads and copper rings shift again. A reminder of why you're trudging inland instead of sipping mead by the fire. Past the last turf house, the path becomes a narrow spine of flattened grass. Here, the land tilts upward into glacial ridges, the sort of terrain that looks the same from every angle. You pass a half-collapsed wooden signpost carved with runes too faded to read. Historians still argue whether such signposts marked distances, grazing rights, or just served as medieval wish-you-were-here jokes for other traders. A mainstream fact floats in. The Norse used way stations called Leiderstein, or pathstones, on some inland routes, basically the Viking version of highway rest stops. A quirky tidbit. At a few sites, archaeologists have found tiny carved wooden reindeer with holes through their backs, possibly early luggage tags or charms to keep herds from wandering. The trail swings left into a shallow pass. Snow lingers in shaded gullies even though it's midsummer. You slip once, landing on moss, and the smell of wet earth rises around you. For a moment you lie there, listening to your heartbeat and a far-off raven. You crack a joke aloud. If this were a real saga, there'd at least be a dragon here, and chuckle at your own voice echoing back. Only the raven answers, sounding suspiciously like it's laughing too. As you climb, you pass a rock wall etched with spirals. The lines look deliberate, but you're not sure. Could be ancient graffiti, could be glacial striations. Your fingers trace the grooves, cold and damp. The sky overhead has that northern pearly glow, like light shining through sea glass. You realize you haven't eaten since the market and nibble a hard barley biscuit, crumbs catching in your beard, or your metaphorical beard, depending on your mood. The biscuit tastes faintly of smoke and salt. comforting, if not exciting. Beyond the ridge, the land dips into a basin dotted with pools. Midges rise in faint swarms, their buzzing blending into a steady hum. The herd must have passed this way. Faint hoofprints dimple the soft ground. You kneel, pressing your hand into one print. It's still damp at the edges. Hope lifts your chest. Then you notice a second set of prints veering off toward thicker forest. Did the herd split? Did someone else drive them away? Or is this just another set of ghost tracks the valley invents for bored travelers? You shrug and keep moving. Clouds scud low, brushing the ridgeline. Your breath comes slower now. The fatigue becomes part of the scenery, like the lichen on rocks or the droning insects. You remember how back at the market, the elder spoke of a ghost herd returning at midwinter. You wonder if you're about to be folded into that legend, one more trader wandering in circles until the snow closes in. Still, the valley has its charms. Small waterfalls dribble off the rocks, catching light like strings of glass beads. You pause to rinse your hands, the water colder than you expect, and splash your face. Another mainstream detail pops up. Inland Viking traders often carried lightweight iron cauldrons or soapstone pots for quick cooking. Archaeologists find fragments scattered far from settlements. A fringe tidbit: a few cauldrons have been found deliberately buried upside down, perhaps to mark a campsite or appease local spirits. You briefly consider burying your biscuit crumbs in the same fashion, just in case. As the day drags on, you sense more than hear the presence of animals. Occasional cracking twigs, a musky scent on the breeze. Could be reindeer, could be elk, could be your own nerves playing dress-up. Either way, you slow your steps and listen. The landscape swells and dips like a massive, slow-breathing creature, indifferent to your search. And yet, that indifference soothes you. You're a tiny dot moving across a huge, patient canvas. Finally, you find a small rise overlooking the basin. You sit, hugging your knees, scanning for movement. Only clouds shift, casting patches of silver on the moss. Somewhere out there, the herd grazes, or maybe doesn't. But sitting here, with the wind stroking your hair and the biscuit settling in your stomach, you feel a drowsy calm. The saga of lost reindeer will have to wait another hour while you close your eyes and let the hum of midges and the distant tinkle of bells, real or imagined, lull you back toward sleep. You trudge onward from the ridge, boots sinking slightly into soft patches of moss, the air damp with the smell of pine and distant water. A thin mist curls around your ankles, making the rocks look slipperier than they are. The valley stretches ahead, dotted with pools reflecting the gray sky. Somewhere, faint bells tinkle again, either from reindeer or your imagination. But the sound draws you forward like a compass you don't quite trust. Along the trail, a few scattered cairns mark previous travelers' paths, some leaning precariously, some buried in undergrowth. Mainstream history notes that such cairns were common navigational tools for both coastal and inland Viking travelers, helping them find their way through barren or forested terrain. Historians still argue whether they were primarily practical markers or ritualistic offerings to spirits of the land. A quirky tidbit pops up. In some regions, tiny sticks or coins were inserted into the cairns, thought to grant luck to the next traveler, or, according to local tales, confuse mischievous trolls. The path winds near a small stream, and you crouch to drink a few icy sips. The water tastes faintly metallic, like a memory of iron nails left in a rain puddle. You notice delicate hoof prints near the bank. Your pulse quickens. You can't tell if they're fresh or a week old. The reindeer? Maybe. A group of scattered birch leaves quivers in the breeze, and you imagine tiny creatures scurrying underneath, secret observers of the human quest to remember a wandering herd. Higher up, the terrain narrows into a rocky defile, forcing the caravan to move single file. You trudge behind Catil and Brynhild, the pace hypnotic, the soft crunch of boots on gravel echoing like a slow drumbeat. A fringe detail. Someone tied small bells to the pack horses' harnesses to keep track of the animals, though the sound now blends with your own heartbeat. You recall the absurdity of leaving an entire herd untethered. The image is equal parts tragic and comedic. The sky shifts subtly, clouds lowering to a pewter gray. A stray wind whips through the defile, carrying the faint scent of moss and pine resin. You pull your cloak tighter and notice the rhythmic swaying of your pack, a gentle pendulum lulling your mind. The landscape itself seems to slow your thoughts, each step a measure of time passing in quiet, unremarkable beauty. You pause on a flat rock to survey the valley below. Faint movement catches your eye. Shadows shifting in the low shrubs. Could be deer, could be reindeer, could be more figments conjured by exhaustion. You sit down, resting your hands on your knees, and the scenery dissolves into soft, dappled shapes. It's a slow, meditative pace, a lullaby of gravel, moss, and wind. As the day wanes, you feel your eyelids droop despite the cold. The rhythmic sound of pack animals, distant water, and whispering pines blends into a steady drone. The missing herd becomes less a problem and more a backdrop, a quiet plot device in this unhurried saga. Your breathing slows, your mind drifts, and the defile narrows around you like a tunnel of muted green and gray, carrying you gently toward the next part of the journey. You emerge from the narrow defile into a wider basin, where low hills roll gently into the distance. The fog has lifted slightly, revealing muted green moss, scattered rocks, and a few scraggly birch trees. The path ahead is muddy in patches, slick with recent meltwater. You step carefully, boots squishing, trying to keep balance as the distant echo of bells, reindeer or otherwise, drifts intermittently across the valley. A small cluster of traders appears ahead, setting up temporary camp. Smoke curls lazily from a few turf-roofed shelters, mingling with the damp forest smell. Mainstream history reminds you that Vikings often relied on seasonal camps like this for rest and trade, especially when navigating inland routes far from the coast. Historians still argue whether these sites were purely utilitarian or also social hubs, where alliances were quietly negotiated. A fringe tidbit. Some archaeologists have found tiny carved figurines at similar locations. Miniature reindeer, horses, or even dragons, thought to serve as good luck charms for livestock or travelers. You trudge toward the camp, feeling the gradual fatigue settle into your muscles. Brynhild waves from beside a small fire where a kettle of thin broth bubbles gently. You crouch to warm your hands, inhaling the earthy aroma of the soup mixed with smoke. A stray dog stretches, yawns, and curls beside the fire, eyes half closed. The mundane domesticity of this camp, cooking, feeding animals, arranging supplies, is strangely soothing, a lull in the otherwise aimless march of lost reindeer. The pack animals are huddled near the tents, nibbling hay or shaking snow from their coats. Someone carefully inspects each harness, muttering about knots undone or straps frayed. You notice a small piece of carved wood dangling from one saddle, tiny runes etched along the edge. A quirky tidbit. Local legend claims that these reindeer runes help herds remember the route home, or at least prevent them from wandering too far. You can't help smiling at the idea, imagining the reindeer consciously following ancient symbols. You wander to a nearby brook, cupping icy water in your hands and sipping slowly. The chill travels through you pleasantly, clearing some of the fog from your mind. Small fish dart between rocks, glinting like bits of silver. You notice faint hoof prints in the mud. Perhaps the missing herd. Perhaps not. But the possibility is enough to quicken your heartbeat. The traders discuss minor details of trade: barley, dried fish, and furs, while keeping a half eye on the horizon. The conversation loops gently, like a repetitive, sleepy chant. You think of the mundane beauty in these routines, tasks repeated for centuries, unnoticed by most, yet essential for life in this remote stretch of land. As the light wanes, the valley softens into muted shadows. The sound of water, the faint jingle of harnesses, and the low murmur of voices blend into a quiet symphony. You feel the gentle pull of drowsiness, the kind that sinks into your bones when the world moves slowly. When life is measured not in heroics, but in remembered steps, hoofprints, and the soft clatter of mundane objects, the missing reindeer, the lost map, the uncertain route, all fade into the background hum of this sleepy Viking tableau. You leave the valley camp behind as the sun tilts low, casting pale gold across the mossy hills. The trail narrows again, winding through low birch groves whose skeletal branches sway softly in the evening breeze. The air is damp but quiet, carrying the faint scent of pine resin and earth. Your boots sink slightly into the soft ground, each step a small, repetitive comfort, and you realize how much the landscape itself dictates the pace of this journey. Ahead, the faint tinkle of bells rises and falls. Maybe it's the reindeer. Maybe it's a trick of the wind. You walk toward it anyway, feeling a curious mix of expectation and calm. Mainstream fact, Vikings often used bells or other auditory markers to track animals over uneven terrain, especially when snow or dense forest could obscure sight lines. A fringe tidbit. In some sagas, lost reindeer were said to sing back to their keepers at dusk, a whimsical narrative possibly rooted in the faint jingling of harnesses or antler ornaments. Historians still argue whether these stories were practical advice for herding or just bedtime embellishments for children. The path rises gently, then dips, revealing a wide plateau scattered with rocks and shallow pools. You pause to catch your breath and notice a cluster of lichens clinging to stone, blue and gray in the fading light. They seem almost luminescent, small constellations grounded on earth. You crunch through a patch of frost-covered moss, noting the satisfying sound underfoot. The repetition lulls you, each step a quiet percussion keeping pace with your slowing heart. A small stream curves through the plateau, its water whispering over stones. You kneel to cup some in your hands, cold and refreshing. The reflections of clouds ripple with the faintest movement of the wind, and you notice tiny insect shadows skimming the surface. Somewhere nearby, a reindeer snorts, lifting its head to sniff the air. You smile, imagining the herd casually grazing, perhaps only a few hundred meters away, though no one could guarantee it. The caravan catches up to you, and Brynhild unpacks a small meal of dried berries and barley cakes. You nibble slowly, savoring the textures, letting your mind drift. The discussion among traders is soft, mundane. Whose pack animal lagged, whose harness needs mending, whether the next resting place has enough water. These details, repetitive and ordinary, are oddly hypnotic. The light softens further, deepening the greens and grays of the landscape. A faint mist curls off the pools and low rocks, thickening gradually. The day is nearly done, yet the journey stretches on in quiet, measured steps. You think of the missing reindeer again, a gentle worry threaded with acceptance. Sometimes the herd disappears. Sometimes it returns. Sometimes it's a story that becomes a saga in itself. The sun dips below the ridges, and you sink to the ground on a soft patch of moss. The twilight hush blends with distant water sounds, the jingle of harnesses, and the faint murmur of wind in the trees. You close your eyes, letting the slow, unremarkable rhythm of this landscape carry you toward rest. Here, the mundane becomes meditative, the quiet absurdity of lost reindeer and wandering traders turning into a lullaby that softens the edges of consciousness, preparing you for dreams where time stretches and nothing is urgent. You trudge through the deepening twilight, the plateau behind you now a shadowy blur. The path narrows once more, bordered by low shrubs and scattered stones that catch the last glimmers of fading light. Your boots squelch in patches of wet moss and the faint sound of distant bells, a memory, or perhaps the herd, echoes intermittently across the quiet land. Each step feels measured, meditative, almost like following a slow, deliberate heartbeat. The caravan huddles together, pack animals nudging one another as they step over roots and rocks. You notice how quiet everyone has become. The fatigue of the day has settled over the group like a soft blanket. Mainstream history, fact, inland. Viking routes often required careful pacing and teamwork. As pack animals, fragile wares, and humans alike were easily stressed by long marches and uneven terrain. Historians still argue whether these inland treks were primarily trade-driven or more about seasonal migration and herding patterns. Either way, the rhythm of movement carries its own hypnotic weight. A fringe tidbit floats into your awareness. Some sagas mention travelers leaving small wooden carvings along the path to remind animals of the route home. You spot a tiny figure tucked under a rock, a crude reindeer shape that might have been dropped by someone a century ago, or it could just be a coincidence of carved bark. You kneel to examine it, feeling the smooth grooves under your fingertips. And for a moment, the absurdity of trying to track a wandering herd becomes strangely charming. The sky darkens into a soft slate, and you feel the gentle bite of evening chill. You wrap your cloak tighter, noting the subtle smell of pine resin and damp earth mixing with the faint aroma of the caravan's meal fires. Someone hums quietly, a slow, tuneless chant that drifts along with the wind, blending with the rustle of leaves. You think about the repetitive, ordinary tasks of this journey, keeping harnesses straight, counting supplies, watching for hoof prints, and how they anchor the mind, offering a strange calm. The terrain dips into a shallow valley, and you spot pools of still water catching the last light. Ripples form as small fish or insects disturb the surface. You imagine the missing reindeer drinking there, antlers dipping gracefully, unaware of human panic. The thought brings a quiet smile. The saga of lost herds is less about frustration and more about patience, observation, and the gentle passage of time. The caravan pauses on a flat stretch, and Brynhild offers a small sip of warm broth. You accept, feeling the heat spread through your chest, the mundane comfort grounding you further. Faint hoof prints lead off toward a ridge, too small to be elk, perhaps the herd, or perhaps a trick of the fading light. The mystery lingers, unimportant, almost soothing. As darkness deepens, the world around you slows. The hiss of a distant stream, the occasional snap of a twig underfoot, the soft jingle of harness bells, all blend into a gentle, unhurried lullaby. Your muscles relax, your eyelids droop, and the saga, while still wandering, carries you steadily into a state of calm reverie. The lost reindeer, the forgotten paths, the mundane challenges, all fold together into a soft rhythm, the perfect cadence for letting sleep begin its slow approach. The night wraps around you like a thick woolen cloak, and the path ahead narrows to a ribbon of muted gray. You trudge forward, boots sinking slightly into the damp moss, each step a soft, repetitive percussion. Somewhere behind you, the caravan follows at its own lazy rhythm, the faint jingle of harness bells mingling with the whisper of wind through birch and pine. You realize how hypnotic it is, this quiet, endless march through muted hills. The plateau opens into a small hollow dotted with shallow pools reflecting the sliver of moonlight. Mainstream fact: Vikings often used such depressions as makeshift watering spots for pack animals and herds during long inland treks. Historians still argue whether these spots were deliberately chosen or merely opportunistic stops along the route. A quirky tidbit rises from the shadows. One pool has faint hoof prints forming a spiral, as if the reindeer had paused to perform some unknowable ritual, or simply wandered in circles while waiting for the humans to catch up. You pause and breathe deeply, inhaling the earthy mixture of wet moss, pine resin, and distant smoke. Your eyes trace the subtle movement in the shadows, branches swaying, water rippling, maybe the herd grazing somewhere out of sight. You chuckle softly at the thought of a Viking trader scribbling in his journal. Still cannot locate the errant reindeer, may have joined trolls. A fringe humor in an otherwise calm night. The caravan huddles near a low rock outcrop, fires sputtering faintly as a few ember sparks rise and vanish into the night. Brynhild shares a thin slice of dried bread, and you nibble, savoring the mundane warmth it provides. The routine tasks, feeding animals, adjusting harnesses, checking the small wooden reindeer charms, become a meditative sequence, the soft repetition a lullaby of its own. You notice a small cairn beside the path, stones stacked with care despite centuries of wind and frost. Someone has tucked a tiny antler carving into the pile, likely a token to guide lost animals or bring luck to travelers. You run your fingers over the smooth wood and wonder if the same trick could help your own mind remember the herd's location. The thought is strangely comforting. The night deepens and the valley grows still. The stream murmurs gently in the distance. The faint echo of hoof bells lingers, and the soft hum of the wind threads through every crack and branch. You sink to the moss, leaning back against a low rock, letting the quiet rhythm of the night enfold you. Every breath, every heartbeat, every small, mundane detail of the journey fuses into a slow, meditative cadence. The lost reindeer, the uncertain path, the caravans meandering, all fade into the background as your mind drifts with the landscape, calm and steady. In this moment, the saga's ordinary, sleepy rhythm dominates. Nothing needs resolution tonight. The quiet, the repetition, and the gentle absurdity of forgetting a herd become a soothing mantra, preparing you for deep, untroubled sleep. You continue along the gentle slope, the moonlight painting the hills in soft silver tones. Each step sinks slightly into the mossy earth, the sound muted and rhythmic, almost hypnotic. The caravan follows at a leisurely pace, pack animals swaying, bells jingling faintly. The quiet of the night stretches endlessly around you, a steady, unbroken hum that seems to absorb every thought. Ahead, the path widens into a shallow basin, dotted with rocks and pools that mirror the pale moon. Mainstream history. Fact: Vikings traveling inland often relied on these natural depressions for both water and shelter, small havens in otherwise monotonous terrain. Historians still argue whether certain inland routes were consistently used year after year, or only sporadically, dictated by herd movements and trade needs. a fringe tidbit. In some sagas, lost herds are said to leave tiny hoofprints that glow faintly under moonlight, guiding persistent traders, a whimsical narrative echoing the real-life use of bells and markers. You pause by a small stream, cupping icy water to your lips. It tastes faintly metallic, a reminder of iron deposits in the hills, and refreshes you despite the chill. The faint rustle of leaves and the soft trickle of water blend into a soothing symphony. Somewhere nearby, a distant reindeer bell tinkles. Perhaps the herd is near. Perhaps it's just the wind. Either way, it carries a gentle reassurance, a heartbeat of life threading through the quiet landscape. The caravan slows, and Brynhild adjusts a strap on a pack animal while humming a low tune. You watch the scene, the careful, repetitive movements, the mundane tasks performed with quiet diligence, and feel a softening of the mind. The lost reindeer, the forgotten paths, and the long, wandering trek all recede into the background, leaving only the hypnotic cadence of movement, sound, and night. You sink onto a moss-covered rock, tired but not weary, letting your arms rest on your knees. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of pine, damp earth, and distant smoke. Faint stars twinkle overhead, their light mingling with the silver wash of the moon. Each breath deepens your relaxation. Each heartbeat echoes in rhythm with the soft sounds around you. As you close your eyes, the slow, unremarkable rhythm of the journey enfolds you completely. The saga of lost reindeer and wandering traders, mundane yet strangely comforting, carries you toward sleep. The night hums a lullaby of moss, water, and distant bells, dissolving the edges of consciousness. Everything unnecessary fades away. Only the soft cadence of survival, of observation, of quiet absurdity remains. Now, let's ease gently toward the end. You find a soft patch of moss and sink fully into it, feeling the earth beneath support every curve of your body. The landscape, once crisp and detailed, softens into a blur of muted greens and grays. The distant trickle of water becomes a slow, steady rhythm. Each drop a gentle punctuation that calms your mind. The faint tinkle of bells, whether real or imagined, weaves a serene lullaby, blending seamlessly with the whisper of wind through branches. You notice the scent of pine and damp earth drifting over you, grounding every thought and carrying away any lingering tension. Your muscles relax further, releasing the accumulated stiffness from the long march. Thoughts of lost reindeer, forgotten paths, and meandering traders fade into the background. They no longer demand attention. They become part of the soothing rhythm of night, part of a landscape that stretches quietly and endlessly around you. Every inhale draws calm. Every exhale releases concern. You feel yourself sinking deeper, the boundary between body and environment dissolving. The gentle cadence of footsteps, hoof bells, water, and wind lulls you further, like a soft, repeated mantra. Even the mundane details, the moss underfoot, the mist curling over the pools, the low hum of distant life, become comforting familiar and safe. There is no urgency here. The world slows to a gentle pulse. The saga's quiet absurdities, traders forgetting reindeer, lost hoofprints, endless paths, fold into the night's lullaby. You drift, wrapped in calm, moving with the soft rhythm of nature and time itself. Eyes closing, breath slowing, the world narrows to a single, comforting cadence. Steady, sleepy, serene. Sleep carries you now, soft and untroubled, into dreams where nothing is urgent and everything is gently possible.